A prominent donor to the Democratic Party, a man by the name of Ed Buck, has been arrested after a third man nearly died of an overdose in his West Hollywood home. Now, previously, 2 men died of an overdose in his home, and that raised a number of questions, and now we have some answers, so I wanted to share them with you. Buck was charged for administering methamphetamine, maintaining a drug house, and for allegedly or alleged battery causing serious injury. If convicted, he could face more than 5 years in prison, which sounds like an awfully short period of time, in my opinion. Prosecutors sought to have Buck's bail set at a whopping $4 million. To support that, they said that Buck is, quote, a predator with no regard for human life who gave the victims dangerously large doses of narcotics. Now, in 2 prior incidents, 55-year-old Timothy Dean and 26-year-old Jamel Moore were both found dead of methamphetamine overdoses at his home, at Buck's home. Both of them were black and gay men. So far, authorities have said that the third man who overdosed is 37 years old.
Okay, so this guy's a prominent Democratic donor in Los Angeles, and there's been allegations that he has used his sway with politicians to avoid scrutiny in the past. And Jesus, 2 different guys died from meth overdoses in his house. That's not a coincidence. I don't think that that's a coincidence. And now the third guy overdoses, luckily didn't die. About time we did something about this. And so the stories about this guy who targets particularly vulnerable black gay men, okay?
Sometimes homeless men.
That's right. And so some of the quotes are devastating. We can get to them in a sec. So that in and of itself is a disastrous story, a fascinating story, how he uses power and privilege to target these people without power, I guess for sexual kicks, right? And maybe he feels like he could wield power over them if he gets them more addicted and on even more dangerous drugs. And we'll let the case play out, in the courts. And I'm glad that finally the LA prosecutors are doing something about it. But there's a second component too, which is the problem with our system of financing politicians. Since he gave, in this case, it's not the Republicans, it's Democrats. Okay, since he gave a lot of money to Democrats, he was considered an important person and given benefit of the doubt over and over and over again. And so if we didn't have private financing of elections, he's another guy, like you, like me, like anybody else, right? But since he's rich and he, has courted favor with politicians, he got to get away with this stuff for a lot longer than any other person would have.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I mean, look, we know that there's a 2-tier justice system based on socioeconomic status. So if you're wealthy, you're treated very differently from judges. You're viewed differently by a jury. You have the resources to hire the absolute best defense attorney. But in this case, you have the combination of someone who's rich and gets to take advantage of a 2-tier justice system, in addition to his political connections, which also help him out in situations like this. Now, luckily, it looks like there are going to be consequences to his actions, but 2 people are gone. They died in his home, and it's insane that it took a third person who overdosed to get prosecutors to act and do something about this. And by the way, I want to read you something, a piece of evidence that is really important to this case. So in a December 2016 entry, a journal entry, Moore, one of the victims, Jamel Moore, wrote that he had, quote, become addicted to drugs, and the worst one at that, Ed Buck, is the one to thank.
That quote is devastating. So we can give you more and more quotes from their family members, but the one that the guy wrote before he died of an overdose is very damning. Look, we have a system of justice in this country. He'll have his day in court, but the guy writing before he died, he got me hooked on these drugs and he's the one to thank. Now a third person overdosing. Look, we got to put an end to predators. That's point 1. But point 2 is we got to put an end to private financing so these guys can't just turn to the politicians and go, come on, get me out of another death and another death, et cetera. And I just looked it up. I had no idea which politicians, which Democratic, I knew he's a Democratic donor, which Democratic politicians he gave to. It's a who's who of corporate Democrats.
Right.
And to LA Democratic Party,
Yeah.
because that's where he needs the power most. On the go? Don't worry, we got you covered. You can still listen to TYT at our new podcast network. Find us on Apple Podcasts, the Google Play Store, or at tyt.com/podcast.